notamment, était de voir dans quelle mesure on pouvait contribuer à une meilleure gouvernance des droits de l'homme ici à Genève, puisque maintenant Genève abrite le Conseil des droits de l'homme depuis l'année 2006. Et pour débattre un petit peu de ce problème, pour faire aussi le bilan du Conseil des droits de l'homme depuis maintenant presque 10 ans, eh bien, nous avons la chance d'avoir l'ambassadeur Joachim Ruecker, qui est donc le président du Conseil des droits de l'homme aujourd'hui et qui va dresser un petit bilan provisoire du Conseil, de ses activités, peut-être dresser aussi des perspectives d'avenir. Et pour l'accompagner, nous avons demandé à deux intervenants, M. John Fisher, qui est Geneva Advocacy Director of Human Rights Watch, une des principales ONG actives dans les droits de l'homme à Genève. Merci, M. Fischer, d'être là. Et Isabelle Gattiker, qui est la nouvelle directrice du Festival international du film pour les droits de l'homme, qui vient d'avoir eu lieu à Genève au mois de mars et qui va aussi réagir et nous donner ses perspectives, qui est une partenaire du club, bien que cette année, elle nous ait fait un petit peu faux bond pour la conférence de presse, mais on lui donne rendez-vous pour l'année prochaine. Enfin, elle sera là pour le débriefing, c'est très bien. Merci aussi d'être là. Alors, comme le veut notre tradition, avant de donner la parole à l'ambassadeur Ruecker, je vais demander de signer notre petit livre d'or. Voilà, juste une signature. Je vous remets aussi, voilà, ouais, absolument. Bon, aussi un petit souvenir, c'est le dernier catalogue de Cartooning for Peace que nous avons organisé ici au Club La Presse avec nos partenaires de la Fondation Cartooning for Peace. On a fait une grande exposition au bord du lac, face au Palais Wilson, face voilà, au bureau du commissariat aux droits de l'homme. Très bien. Et puis Madame Gattiker, qui connaît, puisqu'elle a exposé aussi ses dessins pendant le festival, connaît aussi Cartooning. Très bien. Ben, Monsieur Ruecker, m'excuse encore pour le micro, il va falloir parler comme ça, mais on improvise et tout se passera très bien. Vous pouvez parler en anglais comme vous voulez.
Je reste assis? Comme vous voulez. Ça va, ça va. Monsieur le directeur, chers collègues, je me réjouis de vous rencontrer aujourd'hui en tant que président du Conseil des droits de l'homme. Comme vous le savez, on vient de conclure la 8e session du Conseil avec un agenda assez chargé. On a adopté 37 résolutions portant sur une large éventail de thèmes. De ces 37 textes, 20 ont été adoptés sans être mis aux voix. Et 17 ont été mis aux voix. De plus, 3 déclarations du président ont été présentées sur Beijing Plus 20, sur l'assistance technique dans le domaine des droits de l'homme en Haïti et sur le 70e anniversaire de la fin de la Deuxième Guerre mondiale. Le prochain grand défi devant nous consiste à traduire par des gestes concrets ces résolutions en action. Cela est aussi une responsabilité qui incombe à vous, les médias, et nous comptons sur vous pour nous aider à avoir un réel impact sur les terrains. Rétrospectivement, pendant le segment d'autres niveaux, au début de la session, plus de 90 pays ont pris la parole sur le thème des droits de l'homme. Je considère que cela témoigne de l'importance capitale que les États attachent au travail du Conseil. I'm now turning to English, which doesn't stop you later from asking questions in French and other languages if desired. I won't go into the details of the decision taken thus far, but I did want to note that we created 2 new mandates, two new special rapporteurs. One is the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to privacy with a focus on the digital age. and that of an independent expert on the enjoyment of human rights of persons with albinism. In particular, of course, the special rapporteur with regard to privacy in the digital age links directly into some of the other good things that have been happening during this council, including the FIFDH Film Festival and the film Citizen 4, which I actually went to see in my private capacity, and I was quite impressed. On a different note, I would like to express my heartfelt sympathy and condolences to the family of Ambassador Yusuf Bari, permanent representative of Somalia to the United Nations office in Geneva. I don't know if you've heard, but he was killed in a terrorist attack in Mogadishu, and he will be remembered for his work as a champion of human rights for all, and one of the key actors responsible for the resolution which declared 13th June of each year as International Albinism Awareness Day. So I think it is very sad that we lose him at this very point where we have established an independent expert on the human rights of persons with albinism. It's a particular tragedy. Turning back to the HRC early in the session, we were fortunate to benefit from the presence of the president of Kiribati and the prime minister of Tuvalu, who participated in our debate on climate change and human rights. They outlined the moral imperative of the global community to take urgent action against the negative effects of climate change and their effect on basically all human rights. And I think it was very good that we had this debate, and it clearly highlighted also our responsibility from the human rights perspective with regard to preparing the ground for the COP21 conference in Paris later this year. We also heard from the High Commissioner for Human Rights, who presented a sobering report on so many human rights issues around the globe, spotlighting inter alia the protracted crises situations in the DPRK and in Mali. The situation in Syria continued to dominate our agenda with a comprehensive report by the Commission of Inquiry on Syria, which outlined the horrors that tragically continue for the 5th consecutive year. And oftentimes we think if it wasn't for that Commission of Inquiry, we probably would not even hear about these atrocious violations of human rights. As you know, the OHCHR's report on Sri Lanka was postponed to September, and the report of the COI on Gaza was postponed to June. With regard to Iraq, we listened to the atrocities being committed by the so-called Islamic State, which shook our conscience and which defy all logic. As a president, I've heard repeated calls for accountability, which I fully share. This must be a sign not only to those committing these horrific acts, but also to the victims, to let them know they have not been forgotten and that justice will be delivered. Against the background of all discussions inside Room 20 are, of course, the persisting terrorist attacks around the globe, including the killings in Tunisia and Yemen the week before last. We must stand united to address these horrid human rights abuses. Sadly, and this is, I'm sure, something that John Fisher will also elaborate on, the Council once again heard chilling testimony from the victims and witnesses of human rights violations and abuses. On this note, I cannot repeat this enough. Attempts to hinder human rights defenders from traveling to Geneva, from interacting with the Council and its mechanisms and are totally unacceptable. I'm committed with my Bureau to address all such reports quickly, effectively, whenever they come to my attention, and to follow up, and we have done so. In a similar vein, especially concerning is reprisals, what I call reprisals against mandate holders, as was the case with the Special Rapporteur on Myanmar. I cannot overestimate the importance of special procedures for the work of the HRC, And I particularly welcome the interesting report on the 21st annual meeting of special procedures presented by its chair, François Crépeau. I recommend you all to read it. I'm sure you have followed this. For the first time this year, discussed the annual report of the special rapporteurs with all the cross-cutting issues they see to their mandates at the council, and I would like to keep that up in the future, because I think we can learn a lot from their systematic observations. So I think that was a good feature. We had a very good discussion, including, of course, the special challenges for the special rapporteurs. One being financing of all the activities, and the other is the one I've mentioned, the reprisals against mandate holders and sort of reprisals when it comes to interacting with them. In total, I've mentioned 2 already. We appointed 4 new mandate holders and heard from 21 experts and expert groups presenting crucial reports on themes such as hate speech and violence committed in the name of religion, torture, freedom of religion or belief, the rights of persons with disabilities, and panel discussions on racial discrimination and climate change, among others. We also adopted another 14 UPR reports, bringing us a step closer to completing the second cycle of this important process. But of course, the key is to follow up on the recommendations, ensure that the states implement the recommendations they have accepted, and in turn achieve results on the ground. I would also like to inform you that I am planning to travel to New York in the 3rd week of April, towards the end of the month, to brief the 3rd committee on our important work in the Council and continue working on improving the relationship and communication between New York and Geneva. Also, looking at the challenges ahead, the systemic challenges, I think we should continue to focus as a council on some of the cross-cutting concerns that I have heard as a president relating to what I call 3 thematic baskets. One is the relationship between New York and Geneva, including the famous 2424 case on reprisals, where we are working on a solution with the General Assembly President. Then, of course, all the questions related to our efficiency. How do we deal effectively with the inflation of our agenda and able to focus on what is absolutely our core mandate? That's not to... it's an issue for ourselves to solve. And the third thing is the effectiveness. You know, how can we measure impact of the Council? We have some interesting yardsticks. For example, the comparison between the first and the second UPR cycle. We can look at the recommendations of the first UPR cycle and compare them to the recommendations of the second UPR cycle, and actually have a yardstick how we can measure progress on the ground with regard to protection and promotion of human rights. We need other such yardsticks. So I think there's also an effectiveness discussion, informal discussion ongoing in New York, in New York, and of course here. Enfin, comme vous le savez, le groupe africain a soumis une demande au sujet de la tenue d'une session extraordinaire du Conseil le 1er avril sur les attaques terroristes et les graves violations des droits de l'homme commises par le groupe terroriste Boko Haram. C'est important que la communauté internationale considère les effets des actions répugnantes du groupe Boko Haram sur les droits de l'homme dans la région. C'est également important de mettre la lumière sur les violations des droits de l'homme commises par ce groupe et la responsabilité de l'État de faire face à ces violations. J'aimerais maintenant répondre à quelques-unes de votre questions, but I think I first give the microphone to you. Back to you.
Okay. Thank you. You can keep it. C'est bon. Très bien. Alors maintenant, je vais passer la parole à M. Fischer pour une réaction enfin une intervention ainsi qu'à Madame Gattiker. Je vous laisse prendre ce micro. Vous allez vous le partager avec Isabelle, puis nous on gardera celui-ci. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, et merci beaucoup au Club de la Presse pour l'invitation à être ici aujourd'hui. C'est un grand plaisir d'être parmi vous pour cette discussion. As Ambassador Ruecker has mentioned, it is a time of challenge in the human rights community. And I think today's discussion on issues around global governance is particularly timely and relevant. We seem to live in an age where almost every day atrocities speak to us from the newspapers, from our headlines. And I join with the ambassador in commemorating the loss of the Somali ambassador. I think those kinds of horrific incidents bring home just how close the threats of attacks and terrorism really are. And in an age where, whether it's the Charlie Hebdo attacks in Paris, whether it's the glorification of atrocity by the Islamic State, whether it's government crackdowns on civil society in numerous countries around the world, whether it's the abduction and killings of teacher trainees in Mexico, whether it's the shooting down of a passenger aircraft over eastern Ukraine, the challenges we face around the world are numerous. So this is the right time, I believe, for a discussion of governance in the field of human rights. Now more than ever, we need a strong and unified international community. We need principled leadership. We need robust human rights mechanisms that will fulfill their mandate in order to ensure that our responses to these atrocities take place within a human rights framework, and that we always focus on putting the needs of victims first. So one of the questions, of course, for today's discussion is the extent to which the human rights mechanisms that we have are fulfilling that promise. And of course, having recently emerged, as we all have, from the recent session of the Human Rights Council, it is an appropriate time to reflect on both the gains and the challenges from that session. I would like to acknowledge at the outset that one of the key features of governance and of leadership within the context of the Human Rights Council is the role of the President and his Bureau, and to particularly pay tribute to Ambassador Ruecker, who I think has been engaging in the role of the President with leadership, with vision, and with impressive efficiency. I'm particularly grateful today to be able to speak in this setting, because it's the first time in a month I've had more than 2 minutes to make a statement. But it's also important to recognize those first characteristics of leadership and vision, because I've been working with the Human Rights Council or in and around the spaces of the Human Rights Council since it was founded almost 10 years ago. And over the years, we've seen a diversity of approaches from the bureaus of the Human Rights Council. In some cases, there has been simply administration and housekeeping of the Human Rights Council, whereas my own view as a member of civil society is that what's really needed is to ensure that the President and the Bureau are first and foremost the guardians of the institutional framework, defenders of the human rights system, and work hard to ensure that there is no encroachment on the core principles that the Human Rights Council was founded to address. So in that light, we have been very grateful to see that space for civil society has been defended to ensure that human rights concerns can be addressed on their substance rather than being cut short on points of order or procedural tactics. We've been pleased to see that at the recent session, when there were serious concerns raised about reprisals against a human rights defender seeking to travel to Geneva, who was threatened and detained, that there was a prompt and swift response from the Presidency and Bureau. Of course, there are always challenges, and we note that over a year later, there has still not been an accounting from China for the death of Chao Shunli, a human rights defender who was detained and died in custody on her way to Geneva to participate in the UPR of that country. It's a concern for us also that Thank you. That seems better. Then in terms of, for example, the cooperation of some member states with the special procedures of the Human Rights Council, there are still states who decline to receive country visits from special procedures, and between, I think, half and 2/3 of urgent appeals from special procedures go unanswered by member states. And I think that underlines also that even within the institutional frameworks that the Council itself has agreed to, and notwithstanding the pledge of Council members to cooperate with the Human Rights Council and their commitments to uphold the higher standards of human rights, the system can hardly function if one of the key tools available to it is ignored and urgent appeals from special procedures go unanswered. One of the other features of governance, I think, within the context of the Human Rights Council is, of course, the High Commissioner himself and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. It's, I think, from the moment of his first address to the Human Rights Council at the beginning of the session and throughout the session and the work that his office does, both here in Geneva and in the field on a continuing basis, the High Commissioner is just an essential feature of the international human rights framework. Two of the key challenges, I think, that he and his office faces are firstly, chronic underfunding in order to respond to the many demands on his time in face of the violations around the world and the demands of the UN human rights institutions and member states. And secondly, we were concerned to see at this session of the Council attacks on the independence of the office as well, particularly through a Cuban-led resolution that would refer to, for the consideration of the General Assembly, a report by what's called the Joint Inspection Unit, focused on the management and oversight of the office. While that report highlights some key and important themes, including the question of funding of the office, it also would seek to strengthen the role of member states in what are called directing and providing strategic guidance to the work of the office. And clearly, for the High Commissioner to do his job effectively, he has to be able to do it independently and to be able to stand outside of the political dynamics of the Council. So it was a great concern to us that, firstly, that resolution was brought in the first place, and secondly, that it was adopted by a majority of the Council members. Other challenges within the Council framework, of course, include the continuing concerns around selectivity. We often hear selectivity invoked by some states, usually in order to urge the Council to address fewer country situations, not more. Although the UPR, the Universal Periodic Review, has helped to address the concerns around selectivity by ensuring that all UN member states are subject to scrutiny of the human rights records, there are nonetheless serious situations that demand the Council's attention, as the Ambassador has mentioned. And unfortunately, which situations do attract that kind of attention still remain imbalanced. Some of the more global superpowers, like the US, China, and Russia, receive something of a free pass. Others do receive scrutiny. And then there are situations where there has been, for example, a significant crackdown on civil society and concerns in relation to states like Egypt, Bahrain, Azerbaijan, and a great deal of difficulty in ensuring that these situations receive the attention that they deserve. Another worrying trend for us is the practice under some agenda items, particularly Agenda Item 10 on technical cooperation, for states to draft their own resolutions, which inevitably mean that they are one-sided and weak in terms of the state responsibilities. So the Ambassador has mentioned, for example, the resolution adopted at this session on Iraq. That resolution very appropriately acknowledges the importance and the need to address the atrocities committed by the Islamic State, ISIL. But unfortunately did not adequately acknowledge the responsibility of Iraq to ensure that its response through Iraqi security forces and government-affiliated militias respects the international human rights framework, even though the High Commissioner had recently produced a report saying that some of these responses may amount to war crimes. So when the High Commissioner releases a strong set of conclusions like that, it demands an equally strong response from the international community, and unfortunately that was not apparent in the resolution from the Council. And I think that highlights also a broader challenge in our global response to terrorism more broadly. Clearly, there is a great need at this time in our modern history to have strong responses to the threat of terrorist attacks and organizations. But it is also important that our response to those attacks be within the human rights framework, and that governments avoid feeding a cycle of violence and abuse through ignoring the human rights framework. So we were concerned, for example, to see also a resolution presented by Egypt, which talked about the importance of addressing terrorism, but which omitted certain agreed principles that had been debated in previous resolutions on the subject about the need to ensure that counterterrorism responses respect human rights. and our own experiences in civil society is that counterterrorism laws are all too often invoked by states in order to detain without trial or otherwise crack down on those who challenge state authority. And that's a concern in a number of countries around the world. There's a lot more that one could say in terms of the global dynamics, some of the challenge we're facing. I also want to acknowledge that there have been a number of positive trends, and we share with the ambassador the positive reaction to the creation, for example, of the new mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the right to privacy, which we feel will be an important response to the global surveillance engaged in by a number of states and fulfill a gap in the international human rights system. There was a good reaffirmation of the balance in relation to the need to protect freedom of religion, but to also ensure that occurs while respecting freedom of expression and situated within the international human rights framework. And there have been some good engagement with a broad range of country situations and some positive outcomes in that regard. Finally, no discussion of governance, I think, would be complete without also acknowledging the role of civil society and the voices that human rights defenders bring to the table are critical, often in many countries at great risk to their own lives, to their own ability to remain free from detention. A number of those individuals are willing to speak out within the international human rights framework, and that's important. With a view to holding states accountable for the positions that they take, our own organization, Human Rights Watch, has recently launched a website tool called Votes Count, in which we track the voting records of member states from across the human rights system, and particularly members of the Human Rights Council, with a view to, as civil society, holding states accountable for the positions they take within the human rights community. And so we would certainly commend that to your attention. As we move forward into the year to come, I think it's important that we remain vigilant to address the various challenges that we've identified, that we always put the human rights framework first, and that we look at ways of raising the bar on what it means to be a member of the Human Rights Council, by shining a spotlight on situations of reprisals, by highlighting cases of non-cooperation with the system of special procedures, and perhaps also by instituting something like a membership pledge or some kind of common understanding of what it means to be a member of the Human Rights Council and the increased responsibility to promote and protect human rights and always to protect the rights of victims. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Fischer. Je vais laisser encore la parole à Madame Gattiker pour peut-être une réaction, Monsieur l'ambassadeur.
So what I wanted to highlight on this discussion is regarding of the festival. Can be, as the festival, we do think that a festival that is taking place in Geneva since 13 years every year during the Human Rights Council can also be a powerful tool for not only outsourcing information, but also holding account of the states and human rights violations around the world. What is the festival? Well, it's a unique event in the world because it's both a film festival where we screen 2 international competitions of fictions and documentaries that have been awarded all around the world, made by filmmakers from the north and also from developing countries. And after the screenings, we hold every night high-key panels every night about human rights violations wherever they occur. The link with the Human Rights Council is very interesting. As Sergio Vieira de Mello was the first patron of the festival, as soon as we launched this idea, because we noticed that actually in Geneva there are so many people fighting for human rights, being NGOs, being diplomats, members of the council, but also people from the University of Geneva, students, also migrant populations, associations, and civil society in general. But all these people were all in Geneva, but there was no place where they could really interact. So that was the first main idea of the festival. When we went to Sergio in 2000, it was November 2002, he immediately said it was a great idea, a very important idea, to have a counterpart to the council in Geneva. He came to the first edition of the festival in March 2003, just before he was tragically killed. But his spirit stays. He is still the patron of the festival. And every year, since 2003, the High Commissioner is coming to the opening of the festival and making a powerful statement, which is very important for us. We also try to raise, of course, subjects that are not raised in the Council for diplomatic reasons that you all know, but also focus on subjects that are raised by the states or diplomatic representation. It's not only a militant festival, it's really a festival to think the world in a different way. So we work with many diplomatic representations. The Swiss Ministry of Foreign Affairs is a great patron of the festival. The European Union representation in Geneva, the French mission, etc. Of course, they do not dictate the agenda of the festival, but they help us a lot in giving visibility to certain subjects. Of course, it does not refrain us to criticizing the states, even the Swiss state. We can cite, for example, this year we had 2 debates, one about Nestlé and baby milk in Pakistan in the 90s, but we also raised the problems with Nestlé in general. And the last debate of the festival that was about business and human rights. We had members from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs talking, but we also, of course, stated against some actions of Swiss enterprises and corporations. There are also very interesting links with the civil society in general, meaning the population. We have an amazing audience every year. 30,000 people attended the festival. Every venue was fully packed. It was completely crazy. Not only Snowdon, where we were there, but also we organized with John was speaking at a debate about the LGBT community in Russia. It was on Monday night at 6 on the beginning of the festival. Again, fully packed. We talked about the Uyghur community in China. Fully packed also. Child labor. It was amazing. And it really shows that people are looking for new ways of speaking about human rights, new ways of communication, and are looking for interactions. Because what is really important to understand about the festivals are that the debates are public, of course, are open to everyone, but not only open that people can attend, but they can also ask questions. That's a fundamental for the festival, which means the population from Geneva, or people coming to the festival, can directly ask questions to, for instance, Stephen G. Rapp, Barack Obama's ambassador at large for war crimes. The debates are always contradictory, or at least showing different point of views. And the debates are also broadcasted live streamed around the world in English. And we have a hashtag where people can watch the debate from wherever they are, Russia, Mexico, whatever, and through the hashtag can ask questions through Twitter. And the questions will be then given to the moderator. The topics of the debates are not human rights in a shortened sense, but really in a broad sense. We talk about civil, cultural rights, also environmental rights, freedom of expression, health rights, LGBT rights, religious rights also, etc. So it's a powerful relay for the Council, for the topics, for human rights violations. It's also a powerful relay for victims, as John said, we need also to give a voice to the victims, to give a voice to the people coming to the council, but also to give them media attention, not only to let them speak out, but also for their own protection. And I think the festival more and more each year grants some kind of important protection to these human rights defenders. What is very important also is that we have a young public. This year, about 70% of the festival public was young people, I would say, between 15 and 25. We have a school program. Almost 2,000 school pupils came this year with their teachers, but also students from professional schools, young people in Geneva. What is really interesting, it's not these kind of conferences that we always see. We really have this interaction between films and then discussion, public discussion. It's really interactive, and I think they love it. We also try to always focus on solutions, on what we can do, what can anyone in Geneva directly do, and that helps a lot, I think, to raise attention at the festival. The links with the NGOs also are very important for us. We work with the OMCT, with the FIDH, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, big and smaller NGOs active in Geneva. And I think it's really important for them also, and important for us to relay the causes and the things they fight for. Of course, Snowden is a powerful example this year, as we work during 5 months, almost every day with Amnesty International to have a live intervention of Snowden, but also to relay the fight Amnesty is making with cyber civilians. We worked also with the OMCT and Reporters Without Borders, with the Whistleblowers, Jesslyn Radak, Thomas Drake, John Kiriakou. We can also say that John Kiriakou was on house arrest, and he wasn't allowed to give any interview, but he decided anyway to speak at the FEFDH to Skype. It shows the importance, I think, also of the festival. It's not only, we don't only work with NGOs on very mediatic issues. We worked with Human Rights Watch this year also on Hissène Habré. Reed Brody came to speak with a very interesting film called Parler de Rose, speaking about Rose. And suddenly Hissène Habré, which was really a forgotten issue, was suddenly on the limelight, which is very important also. So links with the media. I think what is very interesting with the FEFDH also is that we are really more and more creating stories that are relayed that are getting a lot of media attention, which is more important, but more and more difficult also on the time. The festival was broadcasted on Euronews, on Globe TV, TV5 Monde, also the BBC, Huffington Post relayed the festival, the Times of India even this year. And there is really a wide interest for the stories. So as a conclusion, I would say that we can see that more and more the festival is really an extraordinary tool, powerfully original. And we can see with this interest that it shows that civil society is really eager to get information, to have an access to the public debate, and it's really important to find new ways to give them a voice and to give civil society a way to get into the international discussions, and not so we don't keep the council or our other international discussion in a very comfortable and foreseeable. I think including civil society gives it something not only dramatic, but really immediately interesting, and is a powerful way of seeing new ways of discussions and new solutions also. It's important also that we all stay watchful and keep a waking state.
Okay. Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup pour ces interventions. Je vais peut-être demander une réaction à l'ambassadeur Ruecker par rapport à ce qui a été dit. Est-ce que vous partagez ces points de vue? Puis après, j'aimerais poser une question à chacun sur les valeurs, mais j'y reviendrai.
Well, I can only underline what Isabelle said on my humble impression on the importance of that festival. And I think it contributes greatly to the substantive background of what the Council is all about. So very grateful.
Nous, j'aurais une question à chacun d'entre vous about the values, because there is still this debate about the values between the political rights, material rights, and also the problem of freedom of religious belief. So have you the impression that this debate about values opposing, we can say, the Western world, just schematically, the Western world to the third world or developing countries and Arab countries, do you think it's still an important debate? We have made some progress in that, or is it still blocked, or no?
Well, talking about values is, of course, at the very core of what we do. And I think when we do this, we should look back over the last 20 plus years, and see that look at the impressive normative body of human rights obligations and commitments, which was created first and foremost since the Vienna Conference of 1993. And it's a success story, and this sometimes is overlooked when people criticize and probably rightly criticize current developments. I think we should actually point more to the success story of building this really good normative body of what our obligations and commitments are as states. And also the understanding that we maybe earlier, but certainly already had in Vienna, that, as you all know, the human rights are not only universal, but they're interdependent and they're mutually reinforcing each other. All these things cannot be stressed enough because they get overlooked sometimes. And in the context of the universality of human rights, I think we must stress there is no such thing as Western values. I think that's one thing you've been alluding to, and I think it's very important for us time and again to underline that there's no such thing as Western values. Our human rights are universal, and there might be different interpretations thereof, yes, and we have to talk with others. Everybody has to be in a constant debate on the correct interpretation. This happens, of course, when we talk in the council. But I think we cannot and we should not and will never let go of the universality and the a commitment that goes with accepting the universality of human rights.
Mr. Fischer, maybe?
Yes, thank you for that interesting question. I would certainly share the ambassador's affirmation of the universality of human rights and also their interdependence. I think the human rights system works well when we reach outside of the boxes of Western values, Islamic values, North versus South, and work together across our differences to affirm common principles. Sometimes it happens and happens well, other times it does not. And then I think we often do see polarization and failures of the international human rights system. One positive example, I think, is reflected in a pair of resolutions on the issue of religion that were adopted by consensus at the recent session of the Human Rights Council. In the past, there had always been one resolution presented by the European Union on freedom of religion and another resolution competing and presented by Pakistan on behalf of the OIC on the question of so-called defamation of religions, seeking to criminalize those who critique religion in certain circumstances. And as long as those two resolutions were presented, it became a polarized debate which pitted one region and set of values against another. I think in what's often regarded as a very positive triumph of diplomacy, the ambassadors of Pakistan, Turkey, the US, and the UK joined together a few years ago and were able to reformulate these competing resolutions into still a pair of resolutions, but one on the positive values of freedom of religion, the other on recognizing the need to address incitement to religious hatred, but in a way that is compatible with the international human rights framework. And although there are still, of course, differences of perspective across the spectrum and where one draws the line, that consensus was maintained at the recent session of the Council as part of an important continuing debate, particularly in the light of recent events. On the other hand, I think I referred in my earlier remarks to the challenges in terms of how we position our responses or government responses to the issue of terrorism, and there we did see at this last session of the Council more of a polarization with some states like the Egyptian resolution not giving adequate acknowledgement to the human rights framework, and then some resolutions like the one on Iraq. And I would say that initial drafts at this point of the resolution that will be considered at the upcoming special session on Boko Haram focus very much on one side of the equation, and understandably in view of the terrorist threat, but there is need also for government responses to be calibrated within the human rights framework, and also to ensure that the human rights framework is positioned at the center of that debate. And so that remains, I think, an area of polarization where there are still room, I think, to ensure that there is greater attention to the human rights framework.
Yeah, of course. And I think we should always remember that these values are not for granted. There are new challenges right now, and these values should be discussed with the general public. We should not be afraid to have debates about it. And I think it's also very healthy to have this kind of discussion. The conclusion will always be that they are essential, that they are universal. But this discussion more and more today with the new ways of communications are important to steering these values among the population.
Question?
Yes, I have two questions, in fact. One for Ambassador Ruecker. You said that it's important to address human rights abuses and see how we can improve or guarantee that they are respected on the ground. Concretely, how do you suggest to do so? And then I have another question concerning terrorism.
I think we depend on several mechanisms, if you so wish, to make an impact on the ground. I think very important is the role of civil society and the media. If we do resolutions and build on to the normative body of obligations and commitments that states have, but states do not respect these commitments on the ground, it is first and foremost civil society and the media that should alert us to it. In my view, unless they're actively stopped from doing this, which of course in itself is a political problem one then can address, they're fulfilling that role. Even in individual cases of reprisals, individual cases, let alone general sort of non-implementation of obligations, but also with regard to individual cases, we depend actively on civil society and or the media telling us that person X, Y, or Z is still in custody or is still being harassed or is released. Of course, we, and as we should, we have also talked to our member states from a president to governments and ambassadors level, but we need this corrective of civil society and media.
Can I just follow up on that? We have the whistleblowers. You mentioned some of them. So how concretely would you address this situation? You have, for instance, in the United States, some whistleblowers who are alerting on situation, on the fact that certain countries and democracies do not respect human rights sometimes. They are accused sometimes of espionage or others. Concretely, how would you address that question, sir?
Well, what you see emerging over the globe, I think, is national legislations on whistleblowers, which is a good thing in many countries. We should encourage that. When it comes to particular cases where you say this sort of is in particular important whistleblower because he or she pointed to potential or actual violations of human rights, which I'm very concerned about, then I think we should deal with this on a case-by-case basis. The one you alluded to, I think we will learn more when we have the special rapporteur on the right to privacy and his or her first findings.
Do you have an opinion, John or Isabelle, about this problem?
Yeah, so well, in terms of your question about impact on the ground, I think that's always a challenge in terms of how we bring the Geneva discussions home into the communities. And I certainly concur that civil society plays a large role in that. Of course, we would underline the responsibility of states as well to implement their international obligations, and the media has a critical role to play in that as well. The UPR is a good example where every state's human rights record does come under scrutiny, but as we often say to civil society at large and outside of Geneva, the UPR is best conceived of as a national process with a moment in Geneva rather than a Geneva process where the issues get discussed here. So if there is strong national consultations and civil society input into the process at the outset, we hope to see then good recommendations in Geneva, but then that also requires good follow-through and implementation after the process is complete. And inevitably it's up to civil society and the media to put the spotlight on the commitments that governments have made, or if they have failed to provide commitments consistent with their international obligations to highlight that too, so that at the national level there can be followed through. In relation to the question about whistleblowers, and it relates also to the question about impact, and I would see whistleblowers very much in a similar category to the increased attention that's been given to the need to address reprisals in recent years. Ultimately, whistleblowers are those who are punished for drawing attention to human rights violations. And if somebody seeks to engage with the government or the media or with the international human rights system to highlight cases of violations of human rights and then face retribution or reprisals because of that, then they are ultimately entitled to the same protection of the human rights system to ensure that violations can be adequately identified. One additional category I'd underline as well is the case of people who are arbitrarily detained or who are in detention for political reasons. And we've seen numerous cases of that around the world. And I myself would be interested to reflect within the international system and here in Geneva on what more we can do to, just as we do with reprisals, highlight the cases of people who are wrongfully detained and see what can be done to shine the spotlight on that and bring attention so that their release can be secured.
Yeah, when I hear it's up to the civil society and the media to highlight these topics, I want to add, but how? Of course, we all know that the media is not in a very healthy situation, even in Switzerland and other countries. How can we help the media to do this work in this this really terrific context about media? And how can we help civil society to do this job? We don't have clear answers, and we should also look with the council and NGOs and diplomatic states, diplomatic representation, look for these solutions, ideas, new ideas, and also how can we get the young public in this discussion? We're losing more and more this public regarding human rights debate, and it's quite urgent to do so.
I don't know if there is another question. We have still 10 minutes about, but if not, I have an additional questions about civil society and NGOs. Some critics are saying that NGOs or civil society is a little bit oriented. Some NGO could be instrumentalized by governments like Congos or also by other kind of prejudices or opinion. Do you think, is it true, for instance, Human Rights Watch could be also criticized, which is, I think, good for everybody, but because I have heard some critics telling that you are more aggressive against Iran or Cuba or obviously North Korea, and not so aggressive against Guantanamo or United States violations, you know. So is it true? How do you manage that? Or, you know, and how can we also improve the role of the civil society in order to be more accurate in the human rights cause?
It's for John.
It's for John, but you can also give your opinion as from the public side, from the state side. Is it how to improve all the system with a better role of the NGOs and civil society, complementary. But I give the microphone to John.
Thank you very much. Well, at Human Rights Watch, we welcome criticism. It means that we're doing our job. If governments were comfortable with our interventions, then that would suggest that we were going soft, and that's not our role. We certainly seek to be even-handed in the human rights situations that we address, and we seek to shine a spotlight on human rights violations wherever they occur. I think the organization operates in some or focuses on some 90+ countries, and if it's not more than that, it's only because of capacity, and doesn't mean that human rights violations aren't a serious concern in all countries of the world, of course. So our organization does not accept any government funding and values very much its independence. in that regard. And very much so, the US is one of the countries on which we focus, as are a number of European countries and other countries in the West. We've certainly shone a spotlight on issues in relation to Guantanamo, on the US torture report that was recently released. We joined in a joint statement under Item 4 of the Council on the situation of torture in the United States. We've been very critical of the mass surveillance and very supportive of the creation of the privacy mandate recently, particularly with a view to that. In relation to other countries, we've been very concerned about the situations of migrants and those who have lost their lives seeking to cross the Mediterranean, and the limited willingness of a number of European governments to welcome migrants and refugees, and also of Australia's limited policies in that regard. We've addressed some of the restrictions on religious freedom in Europe, such as the laws banning the building of minarets or of wearing of headscarves, which we see as inconsistent with core principles of freedom of expression as well as freedom of religion. So our own experience is that when governments level that kind of critique, what they're really saying is not so much, give more attention to those other guys, but they're saying don't give us attention to us. Usually they're unhappy because we've pointed the finger at some states and they want to divert attention to other human rights situations. I'd also say that's not just a question for civil society, it's something that we hear very often in the Human Rights Council as well. Very often when a state levels a human rights critique against another state, that state in response, instead of addressing the critique on its merits, will say, well, how dare this other state accuse me? Don't they know that they also have problems? And to us, that's never a response to a human rights critique. We would like to encourage a climate within the Human Rights Council where all allegations of human rights critique are addressed on their merits, rather than pointing the finger back at the accuser to say, well, they could be doing more on situation X. If there are situations that any state or other civil society organization or otherwise feels that we should be giving more attention to, then within our capacity we're more than happy to do that. And to us that's the response to those kind of selectivity allegations. I mean, largely I think they're not accurate, because our organization does a lot of work on the US. And if you look at the recent World Report that we produced, which we produce every year, and profiles the human rights situation in countries around the world, I think probably the largest chapter, or one of the largest chapters, is in relation to the United States. And so both in relation to some of the situations that you've mentioned, but also in relation to, for example, some of the race-based killings, the situations of more addressing systemic racism within policing, for instance. And there's a lot more that we could say on that, but I mean, those are some of the immediate responses that come to mind.
Yeah, I think most have been said. What my point is actually that, and I think I've made that clear, is that for what we do in the Human Rights Council, and that makes this council so unique, the role of civil society and the media is core. It's not something additional, it's not something nice to have, something maybe useful. It is absolutely core. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that we're saying we're shifting all the responsibility of civil society and media that sometimes cannot function as they should in many states, in order for them to report, and if they don't report, things are okay. Of course, that's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, and I've been trying to make that point a lot these days, for us, civil society is core, and that makes us very unique in the UN system.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your answers. I don't know if we have another question from the assistants. Okay, last one.
Sorry, I have a question concerning what happened those days. The fact that a young co-pilot decided on purpose to crash his plane, would you consider it a terrorist act compared to other planes that are attacked by missiles? Because after all, this cost the life of 150 people, and that was done, it seems, on purpose. It's still under investigation, but what would you respond to that?
Well, the crime that seems to have been committed is so horrific that it is beyond all comprehension. And this is why I actually would like to leave the sort of legal terminology, how we should frame it in legal terms, to the prosecutors.
Pas de commentaires? Okay. Très bien. Écoutez, s'il n'y a pas d'autres interventions, il ne me reste plus qu'à remercier alors nos intervenants. So thank you again for your comments and statements, and thank you, Mr. Ruecker, for coming here just after the session and beginning a new one on Wednesday. And Mr. Fischer and Isabelle too. I wish you a good day, and maybe I will tell you to come again, I don't know, next year or soon as you can wish. We are at your disposal. So thank you very much. Thank you to you too. We have a little aperitif and some sandwiches for you at the back of the room. Thanks.